During these set of notes, we're going to talk about reasoning through problems using the reason and properties from algebra. So first off, we're going to learn what a proof is. So a proof is a logical argument that shows a statement is true. The way that we're going to really set up our proofs is using a two-column proof, and that's what it says right here. So two-column proof, and it literally has two columns in it. And a two-column proof has numbered statements and corresponding reasons that show an argument in a logical order. In our two-column proofs, each statement in the left-hand column is either given information or is the result of applying a known property or fact to statements already made. So when we're solving our equations, it's more just the work or algebra work of showing step by step what we do to solve for x. Each reason in the right-hand column is the explanation for the corresponding statement. So when we do our two-column proofs, when we're solving for x, our reasons would be the multiplication property of equality, or it could be the addition property of equality. So how do we get from step to step? So on here, there's just a couple things I would like you to add. These are all the different names of the properties that we can use for our reasons on the right side of our two columns. So it would be the addition property of equality, subtraction property of equality, multiplication property of equality, division property of equality, substitution property of equality, distributive property of equality. So what I want you to do with each of these is add in of equality at the end of each one. So again, a two-column proof, or a proof in general, is just a way to organize your information to explain a problem step by step. So not only to work it out, but also just to explain the reason why you can write each individual step. So if you notice, additional property of equality is if we add something onto both sides of our equation. Subtraction property is if we have subtracted the same thing on both sides of our problem. So when we're solving for x, we subtract a 5 from both sides. Multiplication property, same idea. If you ever have to distribute to simplify something, you'd say it's the distributive property of equality. We're going to go through and actually work out a couple examples, and this is where it will make a little bit more sense once you see the work being done. So remember, you want to ask yourself, how do you get from step 1 to step 2? How do I get from step 2 to step 3? How do I get from step 3 to step 4? So when we are looking at this first one, how do I get from this step 1 to step 2? So right here, this is the question you're asking yourself. So how can I write step number 1? We are given that, so that's the reason for that one. But how can I write step 2? So what changes from step 1 to step 2? And if you notice, the part that changes is right here. So what causes this to change? Well, it's because we have parentheses and now we don't, and it's because we distributed to simplify it, because we distributed the 5 to both of those, and that's how I got these two numbers. So our reason is the distributive property of equality. Then we're just changing our thinking, and now from step 2 to step 3, what changes? So if you notice, the part that is changing is that with our x's right here, that I end up moving this 4x to the left-hand side, and the way that I move that is I subtract 4x from both sides, and that's how I end up with this 1x, but everything else stays the same. So my reason would be subtraction property of equality, because I am subtracting the 4x. Lastly, what we end up doing between step 3 and 4 is, if you notice, this minus 5 now moves to the other side, and the way that we move that is because we would add 5 to both sides. So this would be the addition property of equality. And remember, the question you're asking yourself each time is, how do you get from step 1 to step 2? How do I get from step 2 to step 3? How do I get from step 3 to step 4? So what am I doing? And then if you can see, well, here I distributed, so that's my reason. Here I moved my 4x over, and I moved it by subtracting, so it's subtraction property. And here I moved my 5 over by adding it to both sides. We have addition property. All right, so going on to example 2, we are looking at this one. So we need to solve it out, and then each thing that we move, we need to explain what we actually did and the reason. So this time we're going to work it out ourselves and then explain each step as well. So first what we can do is, if we want to, and this is kind of where you have your own freedom, I usually like to move my x's first, so if we want to move our minus 3x over to the other side, I need to add 3x to both sides. So that would give me a 7x plus 9 equals 16. So the reason I did that is the addition property of equality. So next I look at my equation and I realize, okay, I need to move this plus 9 to the other side, and I do that by subtracting 9 from both sides. So then that gives me a 7x equals a 7, and the reason I can write that step is because I subtracted, so it is the subtraction property of equality. Lastly, I need to get rid of this 7 right here, so I need to divide by 7 on both sides. I'm going to squeeze it in there. So I end up with x equals 1 as my final answer. My reason behind it is because I am dividing by 7 on both sides. I'm dividing, so it is the division property of equality. Now when you're solving all these equations, you don't necessarily know how many steps there's going to be. So just remember that you might have more steps than someone else. It just depends on how many steps it takes you to solve that equation and maybe in what order you solve it in. So for this last type of question, it's going to be similar to what's in your assignment, and we need to solve the equation for y, so they could put it into slope-intercept form. So just back like we did in Algebra 1, we need to take our x and move it to the other side of the equation, and since it's a minus 4x, we need to add it to the other side. So we need to add, so we end up with a positive 2y equals my 4x plus my 8. So because I added the 4x, it's addition property of equality. Next, to solve for y, I need to divide this 2 into all pieces. So if I divide all of them by 2, I end up with y equals 2x plus 4 would be my final answer. But remember, it comes down to the reasoning. So because of the whole divided by 2, so I divided, it is division property of equality is our reason. So we're basically taking the same equations you solved back in Algebra 1 and even at the beginning of this school year, and we are putting the reasons why you can do each of those steps after each of them.